Okay, so yeah, So I'm going to go over modelling anyway, and that's as good a place to start as any. But you want to maybe just think about the different techniques, and this will probably become clearer as you do your research for that first assignment anyway. And so I'm going to be looking at AutoCAD and Revit primarily, but I just wanted to start with 3ds Max, maybe just to finish off looking at some of the different modelling techniques. You've been looking hopefully at those exercises and have some idea about polygonal modelling particularly, and Boolean modelling, which I'll come back to maybe later. But then I just sort of show you a couple of the other maybe interesting things you can do in Max that you might not be aware of. And this one will tie in with the materials preparation that you might be starting to do as well at this stage. So I've just made a very simple object there, a box, and well, maybe I'll just show you first.
You don't even know how you make a box.
Oh, okay, so right, so okay, well all I did was click on the box tool, and then once you've done that, click and drag, release to set your rectangle at the base, and then move the cursor again, click again to place and set the height. Sure.
You can't put AutoCAD or Revit can't seem to.
Oh no, you can, absolutely, yeah. I do a lot of 3D models that way, bringing AutoCAD in and then working off that, yeah. So I've just made that to show you a couple of little things. And so the first one, you've done already. So you did this FFD, which is freeform deformation, if you've done those building modelling tutorials. And then you might remember that when you use tools like this, you can deform the objects, but it's dependent on the level of detail. So something like a box will need additional segments so that it can bend instead of just sloping as I deform it. So I'll show you with the edged faces so you can see the extra detail I've added in. If we take the segments away, again, it's a straight edge, but as I add more segments in, we get more detail. So it's options like that that allow you to create more organic and more complex geometry generally in a program like this, as opposed to a program like Revit. So for things like furniture and other detailed elements like that, it can be really useful to model with a tool like this. And so I thought an interesting thing I'd show you is how to do something like an engraved tile, which is something that for interiors can be a really nice feature. And for that, you can use something that, again, you might be starting to collect for your materials. You can use an image file. So modelling with an image, or image-based modelling, is a technique used in 3D quite a lot. And so I'm just going to grab an image file from the P drive. Here we are. So this will do. So that image, I'll just show it to you again, if that's a bit clearer. Okay, so that's the image there. It's that sort of woven pattern. And notice it's black and white. So here, black will be low, white will be high. Just going to increase this strength here, and we're going to see that pattern come up in the geometry. But again, the detail level is dependent on how much detail I've got in that surface. So quite often, if you need 3D detail, you don't have to model it directly anyway. You can use images as a modelling tool. So that's another thing you could start collecting along with your image files for materials, and you should be starting to collect those as well. So make sure you realise whether you're working in 3ds Max or Revit or possibly even AutoCAD, probably not AutoCAD for rendering. That's definitely possible. You have the same option with any material. Of course, basic materials will just have usually a colour and then the reflection value, or the shininess, essentially. So we can change that colour to get a different paint colour. But then other materials will be based on an image. And so I just want to make it clear to everyone before I go right into a lot more depth with materials in week 5, that you can use any image format as the basis for a material. And so you've got the libraries that I've put on the P drive for you, and you've got plenty as well come with Revit and all these other Autodesk programs. But even with all of those, there'll be, I'm sure, a lot that you want to use that aren't in those selection of files that I've given you, and you need to source your own. So you need to start searching for those if you haven't already. And so I'm sure you'll be developing material boards and design layouts for your materials. And so, do you know how to search for image files for materials? Exactly, textures is the key word. So if it's wood or timber flooring, wood, floor, or flooring, texture. Sometimes it helps to put seamless in. Yep, seamless, exactly. Yep, seamless, tileable, yep, same thing, yep. Yeah, repeatable without the seams being obvious. So here, this one, that's got solid timber, and it can be pretty obvious actually if that's repeating. If I make the, well, let's just do it on an object that makes sense. So this, we can see one there. So there's a concrete material that is done with an image, and you can see that it does repeat. There's the same splotch you can see there, and there it is again up here, and then it'll be the same here. But that material's set up, or that image is set up pretty well so that the seams aren't visible, and it's not really that obvious that it's repeating. Whereas others, well, that's actually the same image, but on this surface it's a bit more obvious that it's repeating, even though the seams are dealt with pretty well, but you can kind of tell there's a seam there. And so you can make images have less obvious seams by adjusting them in Photoshop, but of course if you can find one that's already set up like that, it's less work. And things like floorboards, fairly easy to make seamless because they have natural seams anyway. Other textures, a bit more work. But as well as looking for textures for materials, you can maybe think about using image files for modelling possibly. So again, you can't do it for everything, but for things like engraving and certain patterns in fabrics and other relief patterns and tactile surfaces, you can use that approach pretty effectively. And there are other approaches as well. So again, think about the options that you have for modelling with a program like this. And I'll come back to 3ds Max before long. But before I do that, I'm going to have a look at good old AutoCAD. Because I'm sure for your projects you'll need to do a locality plan at some point if you haven't done one already. And so this is a basic example of a locality plan I've done using AutoCAD. You probably can recognise the area if you spend any time near here. Can you tell where it is? Yeah, that's right, yeah, Newtown Square, so that's right. So, yeah, and so the station's over here. Well, it was there, but it's down here now. And then, of course, King Street makes it pretty clear where it is, I suppose. But Yeah, so that's Newtown Square, and there's the hub building. So this was part of a site analysis I did for the hub design. And so the drawing there is obviously much easier to do in AutoCAD than in a program like Revit, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you don't have to model everything in 3D if you are drawing it in AutoCAD. You can use the 2D drawing tools in Revit if you really want to, but they're pretty time consuming. Whereas in AutoCAD it's much faster and easier usually to draw things like this. And so maybe I'll show you the finished product. I've got it here. So going back. So, and you can reuse that line work in lots of different ways. So I used it to do a ground figure drawing. That's again just all done with AutoCAD. And then that's that AutoCAD line work I just showed you overlaid on the satellite image. That's a really simple thing you can do as well. When it's AutoCAD lines, if it's done with Revit, it's a little bit more of a process to get that. Again, same line work, just at a different scale. Again, hatched, so it's more like a ground figure type drawing. And again, just reuse the line work in a different way with the graphics program. So again, brought in from AutoCAD, and then just a couple of simple shading patterns done with, I actually did this with Corel Draw, but you could do exactly the same with Illustrator. And so that's again the same thing, line work out of AutoCAD. I actually drew these elevations in AutoCAD rather than Revit because doing that detail for the facades in Revit would be pretty pointless. It was only for these elevations that I needed it, and it would be a huge amount of work to model all of that in Revit, and it was just for site analysis anyway, so there's no point doing those buildings in 3D since I wasn't designing them. I was doing this all for the hub. And so then I did, though, bring those AutoCAD files into Revit and use them for the basis of these massing studies. And I've got some more of those I'll show you later, but again, here this is just more AutoCAD brought into graphics software to do different things. And this is my terrible drawing, but here we go. So there's the massing again from Revit, but based on that AutoCAD line work. So that's an important process you need to understand. Some things are going to be easier to draw in AutoCAD, and not just 2D lines. 3D things can be easier to make in AutoCAD, and I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. But sometimes just certain shapes. So this curve here, for example, would be very hard to draw in Revit because it's not just a simple arc, it's based on a spline essentially. And I don't know if any of you had a go at using the spline tool in Revit. Yeah, it works. Yeah, it's terrible. It is. It's awful. So you can go to most of the drawing tools in Revit. I'll just go to detail lines so you can see you have that spline tool there. And if you aren't very familiar with it, I'll just draw a simple spline. And so when you select it, you'll see you can add and remove points. But even this I find pretty painful. And then even worse than that, adjusting the points. I don't know why it's so hard, but the ends move the whole shape, which I think is ridiculous. So there, you can't just move the point. It's really not a good approach. And again, just makes everything hard. There is a way, if you want to just move the end, the trick is to add an extra point in. Yeah, that's it. That's what you do. But it's pretty tedious. Whereas in AutoCAD, it's better. And well, I'll show you one that I did. I might have shown you, but I'll show you again in case you haven't seen it. So this is one I did entirely in AutoCAD with pretty much splines used for everything. And if I had to do that in Revit, I would have. I don't think I would have bothered doing it. So zooming in there, you can see all of these curving, sort of sinuous shapes, which in AutoCAD was fairly easy. I mean, it still took time to draw all of this, but again, it's possible in AutoCAD. So if you have those sorts of forms, I'll just show you. If you haven't seen the spline tool in in Revit, in AutoCAD. I'm going to show you that later. It's fantastic. So I'll go back to the 2D workspace just so you can see the tools the way you're probably used to. Okay, so with the spline tool, there are a couple of different spline options. Well, actually, there are a few. There are two here, and then there's another one that's not even shown here, and they're all good. But I'm just going to use the first one there, and just draw a simple spline. Much easier to draw for a start, but better than that, far easier to edit. So if I want to move the ends, I can just move the ends. The whole thing doesn't move. If I want to add points in, simple, hover over one of the grips, add fit point, and you can just add them in really easily like that, really quick. And removing them is just as simple. If you want to do another things, which I'll just need to make a few adjustments for, common thing that people want to do with splines in Revit is close them, because often you'll be using it to make, say, an extrusion or something like that. So you might have tried to do this in Revit. Just do a quick one, show you why it's painful. Extrusion, so you've got the spline tool there, it works, but how do you close it? You've got to have a closed shape to make an extrusion. You can see it's not snapping to that endpoint. So what do? The answer is draw another shape. Usually I just draw an arc or something to connect those points, and that will close it. But that's a pretty fiddly approach. In AutoCAD, select it, right click, go to your spline editing option, and then just choose close. It's that easy. And then you can open it if you want to. And so the reason I'm showing you this is because there's lots of geometry like that is just too fiddly to make in Revit, but you can always make it in AutoCAD, even if it's just a 2D shape like this, and then import that into Revit, and then you have really good tools in Revit for tracing off things done in AutoCAD. And it's the way the programs are meant to be used. So, for example, here I've actually got an AutoCAD file that I imported into this Revit file. So I've got some cabinets here. I don't need to draw those shapes again in Revit. I've drawn them in AutoCAD, so I can use the Pick Lines tool and just pick those shapes from the AutoCAD line work, join them together, and that's all ready to go. So that's a standard approach with Revit, using it for what it's good at, which is managing all your different objects and presenting them properly in your different views, but not necessarily creating all of the geometry from scratch. And AutoCAD, it's designed really to work with AutoCAD. So, so that's a common approach. But then you'll find even 3D objects often too much work in Revit. And this is a common example. So something like a curtain. Would you have an idea how to make a curtain in Revit? What modelling tool might be good? You could use walls. It'd be a pretty complex wall though. You could, yeah. Yeah, extrusions will work. They'll do a curtain that just goes straight up, but then you can maybe make it look a little bit more organic if you use a blend instead. So that's what I've done here. I'll just show you, I won't make it again. So that's the curtain I've made. And if I go to edit it, you'll see I've made it with a blend. So you've got the blend tool here next to extrusion. And all it is, if you look at the base, it's a spline for the bottom, and then a slightly different spline for the top. So it's going to blend from one to the other, and it'll look a little bit organic in like a flowing piece of fabric in the 3D view. But, okay, so there it is in 3D. But what if I want the bottom to not be flat on the ground or to not be perfectly straight? Or I want the top to maybe bunch up a little bit more and not be, again, so flat at the top. Then I've got a problem. Because Revit will only let you make a blend with two parallel shapes. So you've got a top and a bottom, but they have to be parallel. In AutoCAD, you don't have that restriction. So you can have a spline. I'll just draw a new one. Okay, so I'm just going to make a spline shape. Okay, so that might be the bottom of my curtain. I've just orbited the view. Shift on the middle mouse button will orbit in AutoCAD just like in Revit. I'm going to copy this shape. 2.5 meters above. Oh, where's that gone? So I'll just do that again. Oh, I've got dynamic input on. Okay, so what's going on there? Ah, my scale's a bit out too. Alright, so I'll just make that again. So I didn't look at my scale at all. So there, I made it a couple of millimeters long. I want it to be a bit bigger than that. So this might help you in AutoCAD as well. If you just draw something like a line that's roughly the size of the thing you're trying to make, that'll give you a view. I just drew a line that was 3 meters long and then zoomed to fit that in my view. And now when I draw my shape, I don't need to be too fussy about the measurements, but I know roughly how big it is. So before, I thought I had the view still set up from what I'd done earlier, but it was zoomed right in down to the scale of about 1 millimeter. Okay, so there we are. So I've drawn my shape, and I'm just going to then copy 2.5 meters into the air, 0, 0, 2500. Okay, so that's the top of my curtain. And then I'm going to show you something that you can do in AutoCAD that you just cannot do in Revit. And that is you can change the height of these points. So I can have this point lower than the rest of the spline. I can have this point higher. On the bottom, that'll be especially important for something like a curtain. So I can have the end of it raised up off the ground. So I'll just show you here. So to get sort of a billowing curtain sort of effect. Maybe just bend that a bit more. And some of these other points I'll just lift up a little bit. And it's the little details like that that give you the realism with organic forms, especially things like fabric. So I'm just doing this sort of quickly, but I'll show you. So from 3D, also from a side view, you can see there that it's not flat anymore. It's not flat on the ground. So you might have wondered about creating something like that. You might have a design where you wanted a curve to rise up off the ground in Revit and tried to create it. But then you might have found it's just not possible. Every shape you draw in Revit has to be flat. You can't make this sort of geometry. But you can make it in AutoCAD and then import it into Revit. So I'm simply going to join my ends of these lines. There we are. And show you a really handy tool. Or, well, firstly, this might seem a bit technical, but I'm going to check these variables, Surf Tab 2 and Surf Tab 1. Just make sure they're high enough, because for this next tool called Edge Surf, it uses size. So Edge Surf just means use edges to make a surface, and that way I can create geometry based on those curves. So you just could not make that in Revit. But because you can make it in AutoCAD, you can always import it into Revit and it will look exactly the same in Revit. Yeah, this is AutoCAD. Yep.
Your closest version of Revit would be what? If we did site massing. Could you do
That's
that
right.
with,
Massing isn't
four
far off.
levels,
Yeah.
different shapes?
Massing can do similar things to this. So I'm going to show you massing in a minute as well. But with the regular modelling tools, like extrusion, blend, things like that, you just couldn't do it. Even massing has its limits. But yeah, so AutoCAD, it's not obvious at first, but it's actually a much more powerful modelling tool than Revit. But it does things in a different way. So you've got solid modelling tools, surface modelling tools, meshing tools, things like that, which you just don't have in Revit. And but again, they're designed to work together. So even if you don't end up using all of those different modelling operations that you have in AutoCAD, it's important that you understand that, because I'm just going to show you a video I did earlier. A lot of the 3D models that you'll find online that other people have done that you might want to use won't be in Revit format. So what you need to do is often bring them into AutoCAD first, so you can save them as in the DWG format that AutoCAD uses, and then you can bring them into Revit. And that's the standard way you get all those 3D models like this one here that have been done for other programs, 3ds Max and Maya and Rhino and all these other ones. And Revit won't import those formats, but it will import the AutoCAD DWG format. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And it's a simple thing to be able to view things in AutoCAD and just make sure they're okay. Sometimes you've got to change the layers. That's often about all you have to do. Just save it as a DWG file, and then you can insert it. Yep. Yeah. No, you can't edit very much in Revit.
So if you import a DWG file that's 3D,
Yep. Yep.
you'll essentially import an object.
Yeah, yeah, you can't. No, that's right.
You change it.
In AutoCAD, exactly, yeah. But what you can do is put things on different layers so that in Revit you can assign materials to those layers. And there's a few other steps. Have a look at this video that I've done, which has it's about half an hour and shows you all the steps so you can set up your own families from an AutoCAD file using, in a Revit family.
And that's in
Oh, so it's on YouTube, but I'll give you a link to that. But I'll make a shortcut for you right now, and I'll put that onto YouTube. Yep. Yeah, so I'll put this onto Moodle, but for now I'll just give you a shortcut in the folder there. So okay, so that should be ready to go. Yep, there it is. And so that's an important thing you need to understand. But then, so I'll maybe show you the different modelling operations you have in Revit. So I've been talking about mostly things you can do with the normal modelling tools you get to when you go to, for example, model in place and making something like a generic model. You get the tools you're probably fairly used to: extrusion, blend, revolve, sweep. Has anyone had a go at sweep blend? Yeah, they can be good. Probably not as useful as the others, but they do the most complex forms that you can do with these tools in model in place. But has anyone then had a go when you go to model in place at the mass category? So you might have chosen that and seen that it looks very different. Notice there's no extrusion, revolve, blend, none of those tools are there. Cancel that, and I'll show you it's the same if you go to massing and site and then choose in place mass. That's going to give you the same thing. So So that's if you want to use model in place to create a mass. But I'm going to do it in a new family, and I want to maybe spend a bit of time looking at that as well. So I'm just going to go to Conceptual Mass from the menu here, which will let me make a mass in a separate file. Gives you the same tools either way. And so it can seem like this is, well, at first some people I know think it's just a 2D sort of family, like a profile, because you've only got 2D drawing tools there at first. And so I think I've probably shown you a little bit of massing before, but you might not remember all of it. The main thing to remember anyway is that you start with a 2D shape generally. So maybe I'll just draw some lines, and I'm going to make sure it's on this draw on work plane option instead of draw on face, so that it will just draw onto that surface there. And I'm going to just draw some fairly random lines here. Just keep it simple. It's the easiest way to understand it at first. So that's usually going to be your starting point. A flat shape. Then when you select it, you get the tool that lets you create 3D. And that's really the key to starting using the massing modelling tools, realising that you need to have some sort of shape first, and you have to select it before you get that Create Form tool. So I'm just going to click there, well, just to show you, if you click on the down arrow, it's solid form that I'm creating, and if I click up the top there, that will do the same thing. And then I get my mass element. And with this, if you've done any of those 3ds Max modelling exercises, you'd remember these icons. If I select a corner, I'll get the gizmo for a vertex with the arrows in 3 directions. If I select an edge, get the same gizmo but following the angle of the edge. And I might just use tab to get that surface, and again I get that move gizmo. So you can use that to change the height. So imagine this is my building, and I want to make it have maybe a 15 metres high roof. Then if I click onto a vertex, and then, well actually, do you remember what these colours mean? If I go back to the one with the top there, do you remember what those different colours represent? Red, green and blue? Exactly, yeah, exactly, X, Y and Z, the axes, yep. So that's right, so it's always colour-coded like that. When you see a red arrow, it's always X. Green's always Y, blue's always Z. So if I select this corner point, notice how there's a blue arrow, so I know that's up and down. But then what about these others? They're not green and red, they're orange. And that just means that they're following this edge that's at a different angle. A really good shortcut to know there is if you press space, then it will give you the XYZ, and you can toggle between the two. So if you've ever wondered about doing, deconstructed forms, this is a really good way, because now I can just drag that axis, the Z, bring that up, and that'll give me a sloping shape. And that's something that you just couldn't do with the regular modelling tools. So very simply, an extrusion can then be changed into something completely different by dragging that edge. I can even maybe bring this out, and I might go back to the other one so I can follow the angles that I've already got. And there we are. So that's going to give me something a bit more interesting. Maybe I can bring the bottom back a little bit. Okay, so that might even give me the starting point for a building form that I want to look at. I can always take parts of that away, so just like any solid, I can draw another shape. Yeah, that'll do. Maybe just bring this back, and actually something I should show you about these shapes. If you select them, it's a bit different to what you get when you're drawing an extrusion. Remember, you get those pink lines and each one's separate. But notice how here that's all one thing. If I click on one of the edges again though, it'll give me that selected separately. So I've got my new shape, and now I'll just select it, and I'm going to go to create form, but I'm going to instead choose void form. It's gone upside down, but that's okay. I can just drag this up so that it's intersecting, and I can cut out a section from the other extrusion. So I'll bring that down. That'll do. Okay, so that might be the basis of what I want to make. So I'm going to go and make a new project. Architectural. And then back to the file I just had. So that's a different one. So make sure you know when you're switching files, the button next to the switch windows button will close all the views except for one in every open file. So then when you have a look at that list, it should be a bit simpler. So that is, that's another one. So let's just get the right one. I've got a few files open here. Family 5 must be it. There we are. Okay, so I'm just going to use load into project like you can with any family. Select my new project. And then place my mass. So that's how you use that modelling tool to get things that you maybe can't make with the regular solid modelling tools in Revit.
Can you edit it within the project? Or you have
Absolutely,
to do
yeah. Well, yeah, not in the project in the other file, but I'll show you how to change that in a second. So I've got some levels here. I'm just going to quickly put in some more, just to show you how you'd use this thing. And just trying to keep these similar heights. Oh, they don't have to be, but yep, that'll do. Okay, so I've got a few levels in there, and now if I select that mass element, put this option mass floors, and I can just tick all the levels I want to have floor. I'm going to cut it up. And this is brilliant if you're doing profiles. If you've ever done profile models, it's amazing because even for interior models where you've got lots of slices, if you've had a look at Kengo Kuma and people like that who do lots of that sort of geometry, you can do that sort of form using this tool as well. So then that's just the plates. Now I can go under massing inside again, and I'm going to use the floor tool to turn those into proper floors with a thickness. I missed this one. Oh yeah, I missed that one too. Yep. So there we go. So those floors are built objects. The mass is kind of an abstract object, and you've got this button, the first button on that massing and site tab basically will toggle that on and off so you can just see the physical things. So now I can go further and put walls in, and well, I'll just do double brick walls for the for these two sides over here, and yeah, that'll do. So I'll make those solid, and then I might switch to curtain systems for these two, here and here. Okay, so we've got there the shell of a building, and then I can put a roof on that as well.
So there, it follows the roof line.
Yeah.
Then, for example, it's crooked. Like if you look at it.
Yeah, well that's right. It's meant to be. I've made it so that it is.
Yeah, I mean the curtain wall, the system.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, it's trying to work out the angle based on the surface. There are ways you can control that, and different ways you can make it as well if you want them to be straight.
In real life, it wouldn't go like that, would it?
No, you can make it like that. Yeah, definitely. You could be. Yeah, a lot of the new curtain wall systems that people do for complex geometries like that, they do unusual patterns rather than just making it all orthogonal. Yeah. So that's definitely a valid approach. Have a look at the one even at the casino
Then you can
here. Oh, the old one. Yeah, the old one. That's a Cox design, and the glass towers there have some pretty interesting curtain wall patterns. Maybe the what's the one, that DCM building in Broadway is probably a bit more interesting actually. That's got some interesting patterns for the curtain walls as well. Anyhow, there are lots of others. So, oh yeah, so then the other thing there, I've got the mass hidden, but I'll just unhide it, and I'm going to select it using Tab first to highlight it. Remember, it's a family, so I can just now go to Edit Family and change the original file. So I might decide, well, actually, this slope, I want that to be a bit more dramatic, so I'm going to make that a bit higher and come out a bit more. Maybe this end, we'll leave it at that for now. And then maybe this surface, I'll bring it down or something just to maybe tie that more with the floors that I've got. So I could make that 4,000, which I know is my floor level. That'll do. So I just made some basic changes, and I'll load that back into the project and overwrite the existing version. So you can see there the massing has changed. And now I can select any of those things that I created from it, like the floors. Oops, sorry, that's the mass. There's the floor. And then just use this update to face option, and it'll take on the changes. So again, just going to get the floor. There it is. So let's do them individually. Same with all the other things. So the curtain system, again, update to face. These back walls probably don't need to change, but the roof as well. Again, I'll get that update to face option, and pretty quickly it's taken on the changes. So it's a pretty powerful tool, and you don't need to use it for everything. So I'll just show you how to use it with in place. So like any family, you've got the option to make it as a separate file, or you can just go to in place mass, and that's the same as model in place. And so unlike extrusions and other things that you're probably used to, it doesn't even have to be a closed shape. So if you just closed. So if I just do, if you want it like an interesting wall, which is common for interiors, you want feature walls and other elements, screens and things like that, that might need to be modelled differently because you might not be able to do them with the regular wall tool. So an open shape like this, in other words, one that's not connected back to the start point, will still work. Create form, it'll extrude it, and then I can still change the different parts and make more of an interesting shape. Again, that's something that would be virtually impossible, even though it's fairly simple, still fairly difficult, if not impossible, using the regular modelling tools. And if I finish that, it's going to give me a warning, it's fine. And so now, back to massing in sight, I can use the wall tool to turn this into any of the wall types that I have in my Revit file. So I might just use, I'll still do a brick, just use a solid brick. There we are. Okay, so that's another way of making geometry instead of just using, the main wall tool, or even the options that you have using model in place with some of these other categories. Generic models and others that give you those tools like extrusion and so on. Now, I don't want to go too far into this next thing, but I just want to make sure you're aware of it. It's probably maybe a bit beyond what you'll have time to do anyway, but just good to be aware that you can, at least in theory, I only do this very occasionally, but you can get geometry from 3ds Max. I'm just going to simplify this. So something like that. And so you might remember doing this in one of those 3ds Max exercises, something like that. I'll maybe just put some height segments in to get a bit more detail. Okay, so you can make something like that, which even with the massing tools would be difficult in Revit, but you can always make it in Max. And then there are ways, ask me if you're interested in doing this, you can get that into a mass family in Revit, and it will behave just like those things I made in Revit with the massing tool, and you can use that to generate things from a mass family in Revit. And that can be really interesting, but that's probably pushing it to the limit of what it can do. But it might give you some incentive to look at the modelling tools in 3ds Max, because it obviously will let you model much more complex geometry than either Revit or AutoCAD. And again, when we look at materials as well, you'll see maybe some of the possibilities they have there. But for now, I'll maybe come back to Revit and just focus on the modelling options that you have there, and some maybe things to consider when you're setting up your projects. So I've been looking at this massing family, and I'll just maybe, before I go too far with the setup, show you some examples of massing, which I do have open. Here we are. Just to give you an idea, it doesn't always need to be complex. You can do quite simple things with that massing tool, and they can still be really effective even by themselves. For concept level presentations, just to show the block layouts of your design, they're really useful. And so you can see some different examples here. There are plenty of them. So these are all separate mass objects, and you can give them different materials. And this could just come straight out of Revit. And then you can, of course, make them look a little bit nicer in a graphics program, a bit of Photoshop, and then maybe doing some nice layouts in InDesign. Wouldn't hurt, but again, you can do a lot of that work setting it up in Revit with a mass family. And then, of course, you can develop that into more detailed elements, again, using those methods I was just showing you. But as well as the setup of the, or just so maybe having a bit of thought about the modelling techniques that you are going to use, you also need to think about the way you're going to set up your project, just in terms of your constraints. So I'm sure you're all fairly aware with interiors and architectural design, the fact that you have constraints or limits, or limits that you need to work within, or limits to the functions or the use of the things that you're designing, is what makes it very different to other forms of design, and particularly to creating artworks and things like that, where you're not so limited. So it's really important to think about the constraints and to have those defined. And so, starting in a plan view, you'll have dimensional constraints that you need to establish, and you're probably pretty used to using one of the main tools that you can use to set those up. Obviously, just simple things like reference planes will establish your overall sizes. So the building here might be 25 metres across by whatever size, and so what else might you do to get this basic layout, apart from just drawing reference planes? Thinking about what I was showing you earlier, if you've already done work in AutoCAD, you could of course bring line work that you've done, well, actually even a site analysis plan or site drawing like that, you could bring into Revit, of course. And do you all remember how to do that? Yeah, we've done that before. Yeah. So do you remember that what you need to think about if you go to have, if you have a file like this, where you have multiple levels set up in the one file, and then also elevations and sections there in the same model space? what you should be doing, what should you be doing if you want to bring those into Revit? What's the very first step? Would you bring this whole file in? No. What would you bring in if I wanted to start on the ground floor? Sorry?
Isn't that what we saw on the plane? Like the one
Yeah, well, I could bring that sheet in, but I'd probably even just go down further and bring just that level in. So if I wanted to start with the ground floor, it's really important to have that separate to the others. And I'll show you a quick way of doing that if you don't remember this. Hopefully the sort of thing you're starting to do a bit more with AutoCAD. And I probably should have mentioned earlier, I use AutoCAD at least as much as Revit when I'm beginning my projects. It's probably my most important tool to start any project. Because like I've been showing you, lots of things are just too complicated to set up and draw in Revit. And a lot of the resources you'll get will be in AutoCAD format as well. So I've made a window around the things I want. And then the shortcut I wanted to show you, W, and then Enter, is the shortcut to right block, which will export that selection as a new file. So I could call this, probably all remember it, Eastern Flare. Just W enter. Yep. So you need to select the objects first, and then type W enter, and then give a name down the bottom. So if I click OK now, that will be a separate file, and you should do that for each level, because when you insert that into Revit, there you can use either import CAD or link CAD. Which one do you think might be better?
Well, link to your update.
Exactly, yeah. And there's a good chance you will need to go back and make changes to your AutoCAD file. So I would, if I was you, probably use link CAD. So at this stage, hopefully you're starting to think about linked workflows. And so there's my AutoCAD file. Any options you remember from here?
You want to put in black and white?
Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah. So, sorry? Yeah, if you know the units, definitely set those. Yep, make sure they're millimetres. Yep. Another really important one. Yeah, that's an option. Yep. So yeah, manual. Those manual ones usually are better than auto, I find. So any of those manual ones. Exactly. Current view only for plans is usually good as well. So now I can place that. There we are. Zooming out, I can see it. And then I might tie the reference planes to that. Okay, so that's the process, or a process that you could follow to set up or start setting up your Revit file. And then, can you think of any other elements that are useful to set up constraints in the plan, or to establish the main dimensions, apart from reference planes? There's one nearby that. You might not have used it all that much, but for buildings you're doing for this project, you probably need to use it, or most of you I'd say. You've got the grid tool. Okay, so you can use grids, particularly for column grids, but also for main structural walls as well. Okay, so think about setting grids up for all those important structural elements, especially columns. So I'll just move these to line up with my columns. I'm showing you how to do that. Right, so they're my plan constraints. So I haven't modelled any physical objects yet. I've just been setting up those things to help me do that later. But if we're modelling in 3D, what do we need to think about next? Before going and drawing in some walls, what would you think about maybe? We've got the plan constraints, so left, right, front and back. We know how big the building is roughly. Levels, exactly. So yeah, that's exactly right. So thinking in 3D, you need to move up and start establishing your heights. And so I'm going to go and look in my south elevation, and I can see already, because I've got those reference planes, I know how big it is roughly, and I can drag these levels out appropriately. And then I'll make some extra levels for my additional floors. And so how many levels do you think you should make? Or what things should have levels? Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much it, yeah. All your floors, all the main floors, not every floor, because you might have, say, balcony floors that are just a little bit below your main floor level. So if you have a floor like that, that's only 100 mil below or 200 mil below your main floor, don't make an extra level for that. Yeah, mezzanines you should have a level for those, yeah, because they're separate enough. So it's up to you. You can make as many levels as you feel like, but that's usually the easiest approach, making just level for the main floor level. But then, like you're saying, the roof as well. So, or the highest thing in your building. It might be even an upper ceiling. Okay, so you should have a series of floor levels and then finish it with a roof. And I'd highly recommend that you do that before trying to model anything, because, well, you can see already, I made the grids before I made these extra levels. So notice how the grids stop back where I had the earlier levels. I can extend these up now. Grids are fairly easy to adjust, but I still need to go into the different views to do that. And if, on the other hand, I make the levels first and then go and make something, so I'll do a wall now, and I can choose the upper level, like the roof, and have that automatically going up to that height. And there are lots of other things that will tie in with those levels, so things like your view setups and lots of other things as well. So, like I said, I highly recommend setting up the important levels. What about ceilings? Should you make your ceiling levels? No, you don't need to make levels for your ceilings at the beginning. Later on you can add them, but the process I'd recommend is doing like I said, a level for each floor and then adding the ceilings later. And so then just thinking about the massing I was showing you, if you're going to try that, you'd still probably want to put in things like reference planes and grids just to set out the main shape. And then I'll just go and do a quick in-place mass. And I can pick those reference planes now. Okay, and so then I can create that form. And again, tie it to my levels. All right, and so that'll make it easier to make things like walls. Right, so that easy. Once you've got the mass in there, if you're going to use massing, you don't have to, but it can make things easier. And, oh yeah, so that mass there, I might decide, well, okay, I want to make some more detail there, so I'll put a void in, just for something there at the front. Just cut a hole out of it, and so then if I go and make a wall, Now, using that surface, it'll obviously have that hole already done. And, oh yes, I just wanted to show you ceilings and why sometimes people have trouble with those. And so, really at first, trying to focus on modelling, particularly your main elements. We'll get into some of the techniques for modelling detailed objects later on. So I've got walls, floors, should be fairly straightforward. When you're making floors, for your lowest level, would you go on the inside or the outside of your walls?
Outside.
Exactly, yeah, outside. Think of it as a slab on the ground, and that's a fairly typical way of building these days. If that happens, do you know what to do? Where you can see there it's going onto the middle of my wall. So it's because I've used a cavity wall. So that's a cavity brick wall, and it's picking up the edge of the core. So I'll do it again. I'll just delete that one. I'll make it again just so you can see why that's happening. It's this option here, extend into wall to core. Turn that off, and then it won't do that. It'll just go to the side that you choose. So if you've seen that happen where it goes in the middle of your wall and you can't get it to go outside, that's usually the reason. There we go. So that should be your thought process when you're making floors, particularly for the lowest level. Take them to the outside, because apart from being pretty close to the way you would build it, it'll just give you a clean view, and you don't want to have to worry too much about the graphics and the construction for your walls, for your presentations. You should be trying to do simple graphics. So, well, just before I go into ceilings, do you know why they are they're showing the way they are without a solid fill? The reason this is grey, that might not be obvious, is because I've got the massing there, so I'm going to hide that. But then you can see this is how you'll often have the walls initially, with the grey fill for the walls, and then the floors will often be just white. And that's just because they're set up like that in the template. But it's a simple thing to change, and this is, and again, one of these built-in features in Revit that's really useful. When you go to edit something like a floor, edit type, you've got then the coarse scale fill pattern, and it's already set to black, but I've just got to browse here to set that to also be solid. So now all my floors of that type will be solid black. Walls can do the same thing, edit type, and then their solid fill is already set, but this time the colour is not right, it's grey. I want that to be black, so I'm just going to go in there, make it black. Done. So now all my walls will be black.
Should we plan this like last year?
We did go over it a little bit, but yeah, these are the things. I mean, it takes a while to take it in. Well, we did this a little bit in the last project last year. Yeah, yeah. So now, if I go and make floors on the level above, so if I click on the floor tool now, and again just use pick walls, where would the edge of the floor go here? Where should it go? Yeah, interior is probably the easiest. If you want to do it the way it's probably built, you could do it on the core boundary there and have it cutting into the wall slightly. But for an interiors project, usually it's fine just to have it on the inside face, like that, because you're not going to be showing a lot of the construction. You don't want the construction, actually. It just makes the drawings look a bit too technical rather than presentation style. So I'll finish this now and just show you, again, yes for this one. And then I'll just show you the section, so you can see automatically that that floor's black and fits in nicely with the wall. And then I could copy that floor up to the next level, just using the option here, paste to align to selected levels. Let's just save a bit of time there, because I just want to show you the ceilings. This is a common issue people have when you're first setting up your projects. Have you ever had that situation where the ceilings aren't visible in your ceiling plans and it won't let you place lights? And the reason usually is the way the levels have been done. So if you put too many levels in at the beginning, particularly if you put a level in for a ceiling, then you'll get that problem. You can easily adjust the view settings so that you can see your ceilings, but if you set it up the way I've shown you there, just with the levels for each floor, and then go to that floor level, I'm going to go to my ceiling plan so we can actually see the ceiling. When you make the ceiling, the automatic ceiling option is good if it works, but it won't always. So I'll go to sketch ceiling, and then I'll just pick the walls. And finish it so that you can see the ceiling there is visible clearly in that view. And I'll show you the reason in the section. It's because the ceiling is in between this floor, or in between this level and the one that I'm working from, level 1. That simple. If you can't see it, it's usually because it's above the next level. And just like the floor and the walls, I can go to edit type and set this coarse fill option, just like the other two, to solid fill. Maybe I'll make it a bit thicker. So it's funny, they always make this 12 mil, it's never 12, it's 10. And then we'll make it 140 or something, just so it's got a bit more depth, and I can move that up if I want to have it close to the floor, and that's often a good way of having your section set up.
So the floor is usually 150 and the ceiling is not 1.
About that, yeah. It varies, and it could be less than that in some cases, but also sometimes it needs to be more if you've got to have a bit of a bulkhead to get some services and things in. So yeah, it varies, but that's a good thickness. And so now when I go to my level 1 plan, I know that if I put some lights in, we'll just get something simple, whatever, they'll go in. But you definitely wouldn't want to go too far with those detail components before setting up all of these other main elements. So we've got walls, obviously, which might be your starting point, floors, but then don't forget ceilings. Ceilings for interiors projects are more important than the roof. Sometimes people get too carried away with the outside shell of the building and forget that you're working in interior design, and the ceiling is what people are going to see in your presentation views, especially, much more than your roof. So you should be thinking about the ceiling at the same time as you start thinking about your floor and those other main elements. The roof, I won't spend too much time on that, but think about the options that you can use for creating your roof. It'll be, in most cases, either roof by footprint or roof by extrusion. I might come back to that roof by extrusion tool later. It was a bit too much to go through that today. But that's a really interesting one for a lot of you. I think that might be the most useful way of creating your roof. And so anyhow, that should be the process to set up your projects. Don't forget about duplicating views where necessary. You can do that fairly early. So I've got here my ground floor plan. If I duplicate, do you remember which option to use here? If you're not sure when you're duplicating? Yeah, if you're not sure, duplicate with detailing is generally the one. Duplicate would copy it without the drawing file. And I want the drawing file. The whole reason I'm duplicating it is to get that. So I'm going to go duplicate with detailing, and that will copy my drawing. So now I can go back to the original ground floor plan and delete it from there. But remember, and this is probably the final thing I'll just talk about with the setup of things in Revit. Hopefully by now you have some idea about the annotative or the annotate tab and the tools that you have there. Have you all been using that one a little bit, even to do your text? Yeah. So you probably realise that the model text tool on the architecture tab is there really just to give you 3D text. So that's physical text that would be part of your design for things like signage and other things. But annotation text is on the Annotate tab, and that's completely different. And so that's an example of an annotative, or it's sometimes called a detailing element in Revit. And I will just change the size of my text here so that you can see it. Let's just say it's room 1. So do that properly. Whatever label it would be. Now, what you need to realise about annotative elements is that they're treated completely differently to the things I've been looking at. They're physical elements, so walls, floors, ceilings, roofs, doors, all the families are physical parts of your building, but annotation is a 2D overlay. So notice how here it's in this copied view, but it's not in the original floor plan. So the AutoCAD drawing, what do you think that is? The AutoCAD drawing, do you think it's annotative or is it physical? Yeah, it could be either, but it's actually annotative. And the reason is we use that current view only option. So when you say current view only, that makes it a 2D slide essentially. If you don't tick that option, then it's a 3D thing, even though it's flat, and it'll show in all of your views. So think about that, and that means you can copy a view, and like I've just done, and then delete it from one of those, and it won't go from the other. So again, these are the things you need to start thinking about as you're setting up your projects. Which are annotative, which are physical objects. So there is one last thing I'm going to talk about. Families, we've got to do probably a little bit more. And again, these are things you've got to think about as you're setting up your projects. And I'm going to switch to another file that is a bit more complete to show you this. Okay, so I've got here some different geometry. I've got a bar, and I've got some bar stools. What modelling tool do you think you should be using for the bar? If you need to make a bar like this, that's a... Oh yeah, but before you even get to that, that's right, you could use a sweep, but before you even get to that, how would you get to that modelling tool? Yeah, component, click on the arrow there, and then which option? Model in place? Yep, that's right. So you'd use model in place for this. Why would you use model in place?
Unless you know your dimensions pretty well.
Yeah, you're modelling it, that's right. Yes, that's right, because the dimensions do need to tie in with what's in the project. That's definitely true. But the main idea there, and you can see it tells you, it creates a component that is unique to the project. So it's a one-off, unique element. And so if I copied that bar to one side, if I change the original, the copy is not going to change. They're unique, individual, one-off elements. That's when you should be using model in place for those one-off things. What about these bar stools? Could I use the same approach to make those? Model in place? No. Well, you could, but it's not a good idea. Yeah, that's right. So you shouldn't be. You can, and a lot of people do, because you just get used to using that tool, and just out of habit, sometimes you've got to use model in place to make these things that are not unique elements. They're not one-off. They're repeated elements. And so what should you do to make any repeated elements in Revit? Exactly. Make a new family. So going to the main menu there, new, and then obviously family. So the final thing is, well, I'll maybe show you a bit of modelling to finish off. Which templates? I know it can be a bit daunting when you see this big long list of templates. So would you have some idea which templates are good for interiors especially? Yeah, both of those, yeah, definitely. Metric generic model, if you're not sure, that'll work for most things. So that's probably your go-to template for the majority of families you'll be making if you don't know the category. Metric furniture is good. And then there's another one, metric casework. And so think about the sorts of things you need to model for an interiors project. You have really two different main elements. You've got built-in furniture, and then you've got non-fixed furniture or floating furniture. So things like chairs and tables, desks, all of those things are going to be supplied by a furniture maker, and you don't need to design those usually. You'll just be specifying them from their catalogue, and they'll supply them to you. But built-in furniture, you do need to design, and for that you can use the casework template. And they do work a little bit differently. So I'll make one with the casework template, just so you can see. So I'm going to make an extrusion, and I'm just going to make a simple stool. So I'll make just a cylinder for now. And we'll give it a height, make it a bit higher than a normal, than the minimum, 500 will do. And finish it, load it. And I'm going to place it right on my section line. Then I'm going to show you what it looks like in section. So remember, I made this stool using the casework family. So that's what it looks like in section. Is that how a stool should look in section? If it was just a plain cylinder? No? What's wrong with it? That's how a cylinder should look in section, but if it's a stool, it's not a casework. It's not meant to be casework. It's, in other words, something that's not fixed. What about these stools? Do they look right? They're stools as well. What's the difference between this one and this one? The line weight. The line weight. It's the line weight. So yeah, they are different types of stools. They're definitely different heights. But the difference in the graphics is the line weight. And that's the important thing you need to realise for any drawing type like this, that furniture that you design should be shown cut with a heavy line weight because you need to show the construction. But furniture that you're not designing, that is not, it shouldn't be showing cut, even if it's on the section line. So that one isn't, but I'll move it on to the section line so you can see. So this stool, I'll put it right on the section line, and we'll just look at the difference. Right, so even there, it doesn't show cut. That's really all the furniture template does that's different, makes it different to casework. So if you make it metric furniture, I'll do the same thing. Just make an extrusion. And it's a bit big, but that's all right. The main thing is that you can see that it is in section, showing with a different line weight. So what do you think the advantage, though, of making that a separate file would be? So I've made this extrusion in a separate family file, and I'm just going to copy this a few times. Now, it's obviously the wrong size. It's way too big for a stool. So what if I want to change that? Is it going to be easier than if it's an in-place family?
You have to create a different family because otherwise every one.
Well, yeah, but that might be what I want. Right, so that's the advantage. You don't need to go and change each one separately. It's all coming from the one file, so I can just select one, edit family, and then make it smaller. Oops. Let's just do it this way. Make it even smaller. And then maybe I'll even put some extra detail in. And this is something you can do for your second project, your second assessment. You only need to have concept level presentation for that that second assessment, which is where you'll be doing your first presentation in class. And so you probably won't have time to model all of the furniture you're designing with much detail. So you can just do block forms, so simple geometry, cylinders, boxes, things like that, to lay it out and work out the basic pattern. And then later, as long as you've set them up as separate families, you can easily go back and add more detail to that family, and then they're all going to update. So that's a really common approach when you're working with... Yeah, that'll all come through the same way, so you can have it linked, and yeah, it will all come through. Oh, of course, yeah, easily, yeah. Yeah, of course, definitely, yeah. So here, very simple thing, I've just changed that stool to put in an extra piece and made it smaller. So I'll load it back into my project. They all change. That's simple. So again, these are things you can think about as you're setting up the project. Before you've even done all of your design, you can just start thinking about the way you're going to manage things and organise them. And again, don't forget to put some thought into the modelling techniques that you are planning on. There might be some that you don't know yet, but you can always research those, and you've got time to work them out. So, yeah, that should be plenty of modelling. We'll maybe look at a little bit more on detailed modelling next week. And don't forget, you've got to do some animation for your second assessment, so we'll need to do a little bit on that as well. And so try to get as much as you can done during the week on your Revit model, because to start doing some animation, you've got to have something that you can see. And we'll have a look at some ways you can do that. It's not as hard as you might think. As long as you've got something, you don't need... A lot of people think you've got to model the whole building and do everything in detail, when really just part of a space is enough. And keep it simple and just focus on the important things, and you should be able to get a lot done.